Okay, so we're pleased to welcome James Bratt to session 3 of 5 for Religion in Early America. So I will turn it over to him.
And then reattach. There's just not as much room around that belt as there used to be. I don't know. Okay, thanks for coming again, and all to you out in TV land. Greetings. I'm really honored that you're interested in this topic and come back for more. Religion in colonial America, it's a fascinating topic. And today we are on part 3, which is religion in the Middle Colonies or the Middle Atlantic colonies. Technically, this is present-day states of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. You see on the map here, Delaware is kind of a little tail of Pennsylvania. They didn't get along with William Penn. Most people in early Pennsylvania did not, but those lower counties of Pennsylvania seceded and got independent colonial status. So New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and you'll see that the present-day state of Vermont was once a claim of New York. It was dually claimed by New Hampshire as well. And you had some really, really interesting, right on the eve of the American Revolution, really interesting fights over land rights, because some people got their charter, their deed from the courts of New York, and some got it from the courts of New Hampshire. And there were armed takeovers of courthouses by one side and the other. So if you're looking for turbulence, don't just look at present day America, go back to the start. We've had this kind of thing often. The Middle Atlantic colonies are also most complex of all the regions, early American regions religiously. We have Quakers, who are essentially the establishment, the disestablished establishment in Pennsylvania. We have Lutherans all over. Presbyterians are very strong presence in all around, especially next week we'll see in the Backcountry, the frontier area. We have Baptists, Jews, Dutch Reform, German Reform, Mennonites, Amish, Catholics, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really fascinating picture. And it's kind of complex, and I hope if I'm losing you or you're losing your way, just raise your hand and I'll try to reorient. When we look at religion anywhere, especially in early America, we have to consider the context in which it operates. And there are two crucial contexts. One is historical, but the other is social, or in this case, regional. And one way to figure out what the essential character of these different areas are is to look at what their legacy was to future America. Not that this was their design or their intention, but what came out of their efforts into the new nation. So when we looked last week at colonial New England, we see a strong legacy of churches and education, right? New England had an outsized influence on the future of American religion, at least Christianity, and education. When we looked earlier at the Chesapeake area, particularly Virginia, we can't help but notice strong contributions to political and military leadership. Politically, you think of all the most of the presidents of the early nation. Military, we have that string going from George Washington, Robert E. Lee, George Marshall, and in our youth here in Vietnam, William Westmoreland was the leader of the American forces in Vietnam for a time. There's Westmoreland County in Virginia, right? It's not an accident that both the Pentagon and CIA are located in Virginia. So when we look at the Middle Colonies, what legacy do we have? Follow the money. Money and commerce. So here we have a picture of the tip of Manhattan. We're looking up toward Wall Street. In the lower picture, we have Center City, Philadelphia, with, let's see if I can get this. Where are we here? Yeah, that's Comcast there. But it was the first location of the Bank of the United States. The equivalent of the Fed was located in Philadelphia. Andrew Jackson drove it out of business, of course. But when you get to Independence Mall, do go to the building of the Bank of the U.S. It's a wonderful portrait gallery of many early Americans. So legacy number one is commerce and finance. Legacy number two is this is the origin of the salad bowl. And salad bowls can be messy. Most historians don't use melting pot anymore because these elements of the melting pot tend not to melt. They stay intact. They morph. They get dressing over them, and they pick up elements from each other. So the American stew or the American salad bowl. And when you look at the map here, look at New England. It's uniformly Anglo. Right? It's more English than England by the year 1700. In the deep South, we have English and African. In the upper South, we have English and African, and later in the day, with that yellow patch is Scots-Irish, people who settle on the frontier. But in the Middle Colonies, we get the full dose. We have Dutch, English, Germans, Scots-Irish, and more. So this is where, and also we have a very polyglot religion. We'll be coming back to this map or something like it recurrently through this session. Remember, the green background here is Anglican. It looks predominant, and it has legal privilege. It's the established church in Virginia and in New York and so forth, but it's pretty thin on the ground, right? A mile wide and an inch deep, we said. In New England, we have very strong presence of Congregationalists, that sense the Puritans, and we have a lot of those dark round circles. Those are Baptists. Again, we're fairly late in the day here, 1750. Those dark dots aren't there until the 1720s and 1730s. But in New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, it's nothing but dots and triangles, different colors. Baptist, Roman Catholic, a Jewish synagogue, a lot of Reformed churches, Dutch, German, and French. Those are the Huguenots, right? New Rochelle, New York. Huguenots' capital in France was Rochelle. This is New Rochelle. And then the Quakers as well, and Roman Catholics. And we'll be looking at both of those in some detail. So what the Middle Colonies bequeathed to the future United States was lessons in how to deal with diversity, how to get along, or how to organize the fights by which when you don't get along, how to deal with diversity. And the pattern here, remember, the pattern for New England is the circle of the self-referential town. The pattern of the Chesapeake of Virginia is the pyramid with this ruling class on top, all the generals and presidents. In Middle Colonies, we have a patchwork quilt. And the question is, how are you going to make a coherent society out of this? And the answer is that the solution is to create networks across space. So socially, people are going to be tied together via commerce and trade. One reason that these are the financial capitals of colonial America and of early America and still today. Another, religiously, the way to organize it is to invent something new, which is the denomination. Now, we grew up in United States full of different denominations. The trend more recently is to go to non-denominational churches, independent churches, mega churches, whatever. But denominationalism has been the characteristic of American Protestant religion anyway, from the middle of the 18th century to the year 2000, so 250 years. This is a new thing. Europe didn't have denominations. You had an established church and you had dissenting churches. Denominations are organized groups of churches that think well, they don't have the only answer. They don't have things that they don't have a monopoly on God. They just think they have the best option, but people who have different options, they're okay too. So you mutually recognize each other as Christians. You know, the line gets a little tight when you get to Catholics, but among Protestants, we recognize each other as Christians, and we just think that we have the best way of articulating this common faith. So, and denominations are also not contiguous. Denominations are linkages across space. So with the Dutch Reform, for instance, we have some churches at this time in New Jersey, East Jersey. We have some in Manhattan, some in Albany, some in Brooklyn, widespread, but they're linked together by networks that are formed denominationally. Same with Lutherans, same with Quakers, and so forth. How do you organize things politically amid this diversity, all this diversity? The Middle Colonies is where political parties are born, and we are so grateful for them, yeah? But nobody's going to have a monopoly on power. We have many different kinds of people with many different kinds of attitudes, and they're not all going to have uniformity. They're not all going to have unity. They're going to disagree. These disagreements are going to continue. And so alliances form. The golden rule of American politics. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the friend of my enemy is my enemy. So it's not that you agree with everybody in your coalition, but you agree that you don't like those guys. Okay, and we saw that big time this past couple of months. Okay, so alliances of people who share a common opponent, and share to some extent some common goals. Political parties. They're born in that part of Manhattan that I showed you. The organizer on the Federalist side was Alexander Hamilton. The organizer on the other side was the guy who killed him, Aaron Burr, Jr. And these two parties come down to us still today with a lot of morphine and name changes and so forth. Point is that political parties are a way to organize some coherence amid otherwise bewildering diversity. This is a more diverse society, the Middle Colonies, than anything this side of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? Europeans did not have, Western Europeans did not have this level of diversity. So these colonists had to kind of figure out how to live together, how to manage their, how to realize their friendships, and how to manage their rivalries. Okay, that's the big picture. Now we're going to go down these colonies one by one, and we begin, of course, at the top with New Netherland. That's facetious. New Netherland, founded in 1614. The English take it over in 50 years later, 1664. The Dutch take it back a little bit later, but then at the end of one of the interminable or innumerable wars between Holland and England in 1674, they sign away New Netherland, New York permanently. It's not that the Dutch back in the Netherlands were being lazy or apathetic. It's just that they put all their money, they put all their energy and their resources on taking Brazil. Okay, there was a major Dutch campaign to drive the Portuguese out of Brazil. This was a very expensive war and ultimately a failed war. But rationally speaking, at the time, it made sense because Brazil was a colony of sugar plantations. Sugar is the mint. Sugar is the source of wealth. And what you have here, you have some rivers, The major crop, the major product being harvested out of here and being exported back to Europe was furs, animal skins, but it required very difficult on again, off again alliances with native peoples. And there was a lot of smuggling. This was a very leaky pipeline. So you have the Dutch West Indies Company that asserted and had a legal right to a monopoly on the crops coming out here, especially fur. And then you had people in the street who were, and people back in the woods who were making their own deals and trying to maybe take the furs over into New England, or make a deal with the Iroquois rather than with the Mohawk or another tribe. So the other problem with New Amsterdam or New Netherland is that the Netherlands was just too prosperous in the 17th century. Not that many people wanted to leave. England, on the other hand, was experiencing a radical population surge, population growth, and their economy was not expanding to keep up with it. So you had, in the tender words of Ebenezer Scrooge, a major surplus population that had to be dispatched somewhere, and or people who might flee, and so the English colonies had a larger population supply, immigrant supply. Many of those immigrants didn't survive, but New Netherland had the problem, as did New France. The home country was too prosperous to push much migration. So the Dutch actually were a minority in New Amsterdam. How many languages did that one observer hear? Yeah. So one traveler coming through New Amsterdam reported back home. Was he a French traveler? Or? Yeah, that he heard in Lower Manhattan 18 languages, kind of like today. In East Kentwood High School, where our star history department graduate, he won the national award, High School History Teacher of the Year. We had him over for dinner and so forth, and he said there are 60 languages in East Kentwood High School. So immigration really stirs the pot, huh? The Dutch are a minority. For that matter, the Swedes are a minority in New Sweden. There are a lot of Dutch people in New Sweden. Everybody's trying to hook on to the company, the corporation that's going to let them have maximum latitude and better advancement. So this is New York as the great stew or the great melting pot or the great salad bowl that did not start in the 19th century into the 20th century. It started right from the beginning. The Colonial Dutch Reformed Church. There's one, the upper picture, I believe, is of a church in Brooklyn. Is that right? I hope. The lower left is the church in Albany, and the lower right is a model of the preekstoel, the preaching chair. This is, if you go to Reformed churches in the Netherlands, it's exactly how it is and exactly how it carried over. You don't have microphones, you don't have amplification. So the dominie would be high and lifted up. He would mount the stairs to get up into the pulpit. You do the same thing as Saint-Pierre in Geneva, where John Calvin preached. And you have that wonderful sounding board up here. So to amplify your voice across a drafty, sort of enclosed sanctuary. The wind is getting through and so forth. And you know, the kids are not all quiet. So he has some competition. So just like as in the architecture, so in theology and practice, the Colonial Dutch Reformed Church is an extension. It's literally an extension of the National Church in the Netherlands. The national church in the Netherlands is not an established church. It's not a state church. It is the national church. It is the only church that it has a monopoly on being heard in public. So in Amsterdam and also in New Amsterdam, if you worshiped in another way, you would not be persecuted, at least not always persecuted, or fined or jailed or anything, as long as you kept it quiet. There's this great little tucked away Catholic church in Amsterdam. Onze Lieve Vrouw op Zolder, Our Lady of the Attic. And it's a regular Amsterdam townhouse. You go and you can take tours of it. It's marvelous to see. You go upstairs to the third floor, and there are movable parts by which you could turn this attic into Catholic worship space. You got to keep it quiet. Don't let them hear you outside. And for heaven's sake, don't try to proselytize outside. And of course, there are these great old synagogues in Amsterdam. They got away with that because, I mean, these Dutch merchants really wanted trade with Spain and Portugal. And the Jewish merchants were the go-between. So they wanted to have these Jewish little neighborhoods, Jewish presence in Amsterdam. But they weren't going to, the Jewish folks, mostly from Portugal, weren't going to hang around if they were not allowed to observe their faith. And so they got around it by saying, well, these aren't Dutch people at all. These are really Portuguese. So it's the Portuguese synagogue, right? So they can carry on their religious rituals because they're not violating the law, because the law applies to Dutch people. These are Portuguese people. They've been here for 200 years, but yet they're Portuguese. Okay, so when commercial advantage is on the table, you can find workarounds. and the Dutch, the Dutch are masters of the commercial workaround. See the history of Indonesia, Suriname, New Netherlands, no exception. So the Dutch Reformed Church in New Netherlands is kind of the established church, kind of the privileged church, but not everybody has to belong to it or attend, and other people can kind of go their own way if they do so privately. And there was a long-standing struggle between the church and the West Indies Company. The churches in New Netherlands were always begging with a home church to give them more money, prevail upon the government to give them more aid, prevail upon the West Indies Company to fall in line with what the charter said. That is, say you have to support and uphold the Reformed Church here in New Netherlands. West Indies Company was more concerned with the bottom line. And so there's this tug of war between the colonial church, the home country church, the home country government, the huge economic corporation that had charge of this colony, and the local government. It's a tug of war, very complex and messy sort of affair. Things got more complicated when the English seized New Netherlands and turned it into New York, named after the Duke of York, the future James II, whom we'll meet again. Then on again, off again, the Dutch retake it, then give it up finally in 1674. Now we have a foreign government with a foreign language and potentially a lot of hostility. Well, the English were fairly smart, even though they were coming off a series of 4 wars with the Netherlands by this time. They kind of created a live and let live policy. The Anglican Church is going to be the established church in New York, but Dutch Reformed people have full rights to observe their thing. We'll have pluralism. We're privileged. Your You have an exception. This is exactly the way the Ottoman Empire ran things, by the way. Islam was the established religion, but yeah, until fairly late in the 19th century, the majority of people living in Turkey were not Muslim. Greek Christians and Armenian Christians and Jews and all sorts of. So it's not that the Americans invented this sort of thing, New Yorkers invented this sort of thing. They had the Ottoman example to draw upon, but this was very unusual for Western Europe. And so there's this kind of quiet pressure from the English and Anglican side. You can get ahead. You can be an in-person. You can have greater access to the channels and positions of power if you're Anglican and speak English. But the Dutch also showed some stubbornness, not an unfamiliar quality, and said, doggone it, we're going to stick with our own way, and we're going to be our own enclave, and we're going to exert our own power. So this tension between English and Dutch, not usually an armed hostility, wars of words, but also more often kind of background tugging and pulling for advantage and respect and so forth. The colonial Dutch church also spread over into East Jersey. As we'll see, there was no New Jersey for a while. There was East and West Jersey. So the Dutch Reformed churches spread up the Raritan Valley. The Reformed Church's seminary still is in New Brunswick. New Brunswick was a center. Rutgers was originally a Dutch Reformed college. So it spreads into New Jersey to the west. It also, of course, has been long up the Hudson as far as and even further north than Albany. So we have the spread out, elongated church that helps invent the denomination. It's not the only church in town, but it's connected over a great many towns. And the Dutch language, and of course the Dutch Reformed Church lasts even longer. This Dutch language use lasts until and really after the War for Independence, so that when the next wave of Dutch immigrants start coming in the 1840s, there are some ministers in the Reformed Church in America in Albany and New York who still have the language and try to facilitate their passage into America. I mentioned New Jersey before. New Jersey then, as now, is a combination of Greater New York and Greater Philadelphia. By charter back then, it was East and West Jersey. Becomes New Jersey unified only in 1702. East Jersey is the extension of New York. And so religion there is much like in the colony of New York, Anglican, so supposedly an Anglican establishment, strong Dutch presence, some Lutherans, some Baptists, more and more as time goes on, and also a Puritan outpost in Newark, and a strong Puritan, let's say, New Englandish presence on the east side of Long Island. So the migration from New Haven across the Long Island, as I said last week, was you can see Long Island from New Haven on a clear day, and Eastern Long Island became an extension of Connecticut. West Jersey, on the other hand, was owned and operated by Quaker proprietors, and we're going to talk about the Quakers in some detail in a minute. And so we have diversity built into this state, built into this colony. It's two colonies that are merged together with very different characteristics in terms of their commercial outpost, be it New York or Philadelphia, and their underlying or overarching religious character. Let me take a minute here. Any questions anybody have, so forth? That's it for the Dutch Reform, folks. Sorry.
For growth, is it organic?
The mechanism of what?
For growth, you're
Oh,
saying,
growth, yeah.
what is the mechanism?
Propagation. Dutch Reformed evangelism has been horizontal for most of its history. Yeah, large families. Most of the conversions, if you will, were kind of exits. So they were from the Dutch Reformed Church into Anglican circles, or once we get to the Great Awakening and get personal born again religion, it'd be to the Baptists or something. But it was, family covenant and family retention. The Roosevelt family is interesting in this regard. Franklin Roosevelt's forebears were very prominent in the church in Manhattan and then in Hyde Park for many years. When his father, let's see, I'm trying to remember the details. When his father married, I think his father married a Unitarian. And so they agreed to become meet halfway. He went out of the Dutch Reformed Church. She came over into the Episcopal Church. And FDR was head vestryman, the Hyde Park Episcopal Church, also while he was president. So they convened a council out of the Oval Office. It's quite remarkable. But yeah, I mean, these people are near neighbors. They know each other. So we have this combination of respect and familiarity with your neighbors, but also tenacity and holding on to your own thing. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned that after a certain point, the real influx of Dutch people kind of slowed down because the Netherlands was prosperous and they were not under religious persecution. But from a very early time, there were a lot of German Reformed people who came over Reformed already. We think of Germans as being Lutherans, but apparently it was sort of evenly split. Church-going people who came over from Germany were about evenly split between German and Reformed, but they didn't have one center like the Classes of Amsterdam to be their headquarters.
Yeah.
So they actually formally requested that the Reformed Church put their umbrella over the German Reformed congregation. So you see a lot of German names and a lot of names that people think are Dutch.
Yeah.
If you just look, they're really German names.
And they're Huguenot names.
Like,
they're also French names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hasbrook and even Hardenberg, that big name, that's a German name, not Dutch.
Yeah. Well, I will talk about the German Reformed and the German Lutherans later in Pennsylvania. When German numbers get to critical mass, then you have these kind of pioneering pastors who try to start and successfully start a German Reformed and German Lutheran denominations. But yeah, for the 17th century, they are in the tender care of Classes Amsterdam. And it's likewise. I mean, later so-called Dutch immigration to this part of the world. About 25% of the early Christian Reformed Church were Germans, and their headquarters was Graafschap. That's a county, Bentheim, a German county just over the Dutch border. Bentheimers came over here, and they settled a little south of town, and they didn't call them they call that Bentheim. There's another Bentheim in Ottawa County. They called it Graafschap. But there were a lot of German nationals in the early Christian Reformed Church. They even had their own college out in Iowa for a time. It went bankrupt in the Great Depression. The unfortunately named Grundy Center College. But there was a distinct classis, an ethnic parish or an ethnic classis in the CRC, classis Ostfriesland, East Friesland. And those were German. So yeah, the The boundary between the Netherlands and Germany has been porous for a long, long time. It's only when the German Empire gets unified in 1870, 71 that things really harden up. But those people living across the German border were often Dutch speaking, often were parts of Dutch Reformed churches. One of the great leaders of the Dutch Reformed Church in the 18th century, Theodore Frelinghuysen, leader of the awakening of born again religion in the RCA, took his theological training in Germany at a seminary in Germany. So a lot of people are really upset that we seem to be in an era today of porous borders. Porous borders have been the dominant model throughout history. It's only from the late 19th into the post-World War II era that we thought that borders were hermetically sealed. For most of history, you didn't need a passport to travel from one country to another. You needed a letter of credit and a letter of recommendation. Because my guy back there knows your guy over there and things will be okay. So yeah, there's a lot of fluidity, and especially in the 17th century. Okay, moving to Pennsylvania now and West Jersey, or the part of southern, we would say southern New Jersey. We have the predominance, with a lot of ironies, predominance of the Society of Friends, or the so-called Quakers. Now we think, liturgically speaking, we think of Quakers as silent and very sober. They got the name, however, see the upper picture, from getting possessed by the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, and rocking and rolling. Not the contemporary Christian music, but this wasn't music. There was spirit possession in the early Quaker Friends circles that made their opponents or their enemies deride them as Quakers. We often have a term of derision become a preferred label. See Christian, originally an epithet. The Shakers, a group in 19th century America, were also known as, and the Pentecostals were derided as holy rollers. Yeah,
because of the method they used,
Yeah.
riding horses and so on.
right. Methodist was a term of disparagement from John and Charles Wesley's Oxford classmates, who spent Friday night, Saturday, all day Sunday drinking. And John and Charles were holding prayer meetings and very systematically going out to proselytize or organize a new kind of piety among these. So, yeah, they're so taken up with their methods that they were called Methodists. Quakers are, well, first we can categorize them as English Anabaptists, right? In the Protestant tradition, we have three major houses, at least until recently. We have Lutherans, followers of Luther. We have the Reformed, kind of followers of John Calvin and Butzer and other leaders, but John Calvin was first among equals. And then we have the Anabaptists. The Lutherans and Reformed were so-called part of the so-called magisterial Reformation. They got along with the state. They tried to, and very often succeeded in taking over the religious practice in a region by winning over the ruler. So there's a hand-in-glove connection, cooperation between church and state among most Reformed and most Lutheran people. The Puritans are odd people out here because for so long they didn't have preferment from the English state. Okay. Anabaptists are the third group. They include the Amish and Mennonites. You're most familiar with them. The Doukhobors and Hutterites. You might have heard of them in Canada. The English form are Quakers, the Society of Friends. They were originally very plain people. They were took it as an honor to be plain people, to not respect social standing. So they famously used thee and thou, which were familiar terms of address, because you and your were assigned to the swells, to the upper crust. They did not recognize social status, so they addressed everybody as thee and thou. They did not use finery, infamously plain Quaker clothes, right? So these are plain people. One of the challenge for Quakers is that when they got to Pennsylvania, a lot of them got really, really rich and powerful, but that's for a minute later. They're plain people. They're also alienated from standard church and state. And that alienation came through particularly because of their pacifist commitment. When Jesus said to his disciple in the Garden of Gethsemane, right, the key moment, the critical moment in Jesus' last days, one of his disciples takes out a sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's assistant. Jesus said, "Put up your sword." The friends say, "What don't you understand about those words? Christians may not bear the sword." Jesus said, "Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. Don't take oaths." Any questions here, boys and girls? This is a problem when it comes to participating in court proceedings. I refuse to be sworn in because Jesus told me I may not take an oath. And not just refusal to bear the sword, bear arms, but also refusal to pay other people to do it. We're not going to pay taxes for war. Okay, how does this look like from the ruler's point of view? They won't participate in taxation, they won't participate in courts, and they won't participate in the military. This spells alienation, right? These people are on the outs. And they early on suffered some severe persecution, and down through history have suffered persecution for this stance. They emerge in England in the 1650s during the Puritan Commonwealth. Remember, there's this over the Puritans in Parliament rise up against King Charles I, overthrow him, behead him, and institute a Puritan Commonwealth. Ah, the day of the Lord is here. Now we're going to have godly government. It doesn't work out real well. And the Quakers are very disillusioned with this Puritan Commonwealth. It's just as bad as the monarchy, they said, only maybe worse because it invokes the name of the Lord to justify everything. So these people emerge early on. They're very alienated. They won't participate in the standard church. In fact, they come to they will invade conventional worship in what they deride as a steeple house. Some of they would come in and start ranting and raving and shouting down the minister. As time went on, some of them, increasing number of them, would take off their clothes in these interventions. This is false religion, they're saying. And we have to practice a radically different kind of religion instead. Radically kind of different religious behavior, also a radically different theology. Most of Western Christianity, Protestant and Catholic, since the time of St. Augustine, have started from the premise of original sin. Quakers do not honor the doctrine of original sin. Rather, they honor the doctrine of inner light, that no matter how badly things have fallen away, no matter how corrupt or dissolute a person might be, yet in her or his heart burns the inner light of God. And so what we do is try to fan that inner light, have that purge out the dross in the person, and realize the likeness of Christ in daily life. So we, it's going to be interesting to see the Quakers found a government in Pennsylvania not based on original sin. Original sin is kind of friendly to governments, right? You need order and you need laws and you need restraints. Well, if everybody's kind of good at heart, how do you organize a government, which is mostly about laws and restraints? Quakers will become an inadvertent establishment in Pennsylvania and stumble over at this point. Also, as I said, they're going to practice a radically different kind of religion. No creeds. Creeds are man-made statements. We have the Bible, not just the Bible, but we have the Holy Spirit. And increasingly over the time, the Holy Spirit will instruct many of the friends in doctrines beyond, or sometimes contrary to the Bible. So there's a tension built up here between spirit and letter, okay? But in any case, no creeds. Protestants, the standard Protestants, Lutherans and Calvinists had reduced the number of Roman Catholic sacraments from 7 to 2. Hey, why not go all the way? No sacraments, no Lord's Supper, and no baptism. And no clergy. Everybody has the inner light, and everybody can give testimony to the work, the illumination of the Holy Spirit within them. So maybe you've been to a Quaker service, people sit around in a square or a circle. Is this how you had it when you were a kid? Okay. Yeah. 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 I'll repeat. I'll just repeat the observation. People even of Quaker background, raised Methodist, but you observe a Quaker funeral in this case, or a standard Quaker service. People will sit at standard service. They'll sit in a square or a circle, and speech will come when the Spirit moves, and it could be him or her. Over time in the United States, it is more and more often her. Quakers are one of the birthplaces of feminism. Will also be in America, one of the way overrepresented in the ranks of abolitionists, the abolition of slavery. So these, there's a radically alternative mode of dealing with things. So, but how do you don't have creeds to which people can say yes or no and differentiate who's in and who's out. You don't have clergy to say these people are in or out. If you don't have sacraments which people take to show that they're in or out, how do you know who's in or out? And the answer was birth, family lineage. The only way you could get kicked out of a Quaker meeting, well, eventually you get kicked out by owning slaves or in really dissolute behavior, but the surest way was to marry outside the meeting. Marry a woman or a man who is not him or herself a friend. And so over time in America, membership in the Friends becomes more and more a birthright matter. And we'll see it's also a wonderful way to consolidate capital. Hear that wealth thing again. So marriage in the meeting, a family center, a family boundary. There will be a strong, the Quakers are really the origin of the family values kind of thing. Family is the church, the core of the church. Okay, now emigration to America. This is full of irony. Well, first of all, you can see in the map here, I hope you can see anyway, that Quakers are very heavily concentrated in the north of England. Heavily dots up toward the Scottish border. Next week, we'll get into the backcountry of Scots-Irish people. They come from Scotland and Ireland. The Puritans are heavily represented from the east of England, East Anglia and so forth. The people who settle the Chesapeake very much come from the southern, kind of the boot of England. So these different regions are settled by people from different areas. It's a great book, one of the great classics of early American history. It lays out this pattern. It's by David Hackett Fisher, and the title is Albion Seed. If you want to get into the weeds on kind of cultural anthropology and how it relates to American history, that's the book for you, Albion Seed. So the Quakers come from what at that time, and again today, is the impoverished North, right? Ever since Margaret Thatcher, most of the wealth in England is down here. These are the left behind, the people out in the sticks. The Quakers are socially and economically on the outs as well as religiously on the outs. So how is it that they gain possession of a very valuable parcel of property called Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods? Well, here's the man. Oops. Wait a minute, I screwed up. Here's the man, William Penn. This is King Charles II, okay? He had been born in exile. He was restored to the throne in 1660. You can see he's a real dude. Silk stockings, high-heeled shoes, nice satin cloth and ruffled silk shirt, nice long hair. A man's man by 17th century standard. And you can see, I mean, Charles was not, he was officially monogamous, but not in practice. He loved the ladies and he presided over a very dissolute court, especially after the Puritan standard. And you can see some of his ladies in waiting here showing off their charms and kind of having the eye for young William Penn. So what's going on here? William Penn is a Quaker. He is a pacifist, and he is son of one of the outstanding military figures in British history, Admiral William Penn Sr., a very effective admiral under Cromwell, a very effective admiral under Charles II. The way to reward generals and admirals back then was to give them money and give them land. Indeed, Cromwell gave William Penn Sr. a good chunk of Ireland for his, William Penn Sr.'s, help in Cromwell's desolation of Ireland. But Charles II still owed the Penn family quite a bit. The Penns had lent him money. The Penns had done noble military service for them. William Penn Sr. dies, leaving behind a hippie son. It's like Donald Rumsfeld's kid gets super woke, okay? Here's the irony. So William Penn Jr. is a Quaker. He's dedicated to pacifism. And he wants to give his people a haven of refuge. So he negotiates with King Charles II to get a big swath of land that is under royal control, future Pennsylvania, and release the king from all further outstanding debts to the Penn family. Okay, this is a big trade, very materialistic debt owing to war service, given to a very spiritual pacifist. Don't tell me that God doesn't have a sense of humor, okay? A little bit further, the King Charles II's successor will be King James II, who himself is kind of on the outs because King James II is a closet Catholic, married to a Roman Catholic. They have a son who is going to be raised Catholic. This will create a great crisis and another revolution, the so-called Glorious Revolution in England in the 1680s. The point being, early in the 1680s, Penn and James II are both kind of religious outsiders at the two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? The very traditionalist James II, the very radical Anabaptist William Penn, but they hate those Anglicans and Puritans in the middle, right? Remember, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So there's a very ironic kind of background dealing here in the donation of this very resource-rich area to William Penn, Penn's Woods, Pennsylvania. William Penn sees it as a haven of refuge. So here you see a very inaccurate depiction of one of the nobler deeds in American history. William Penn said, you know, the king really doesn't own Pennsylvania to give it away. I'm going to buy it from the native peoples. Okay. So kind of like Roger Williams, who also got in trouble with the Puritans for saying that the Indians own the land. So he makes a deal with the native peoples, but he gets a very valuable swath of land. It's an act of respect to create a haven of refuge, but also to recoup the Penn family fortunes. Because William Jr., even though he owned a great chunk of Ireland and had a huge legacy from his father in the will, William had a hard time living within his means. He outspent himself. He was in financial trouble, and he saw Pennsylvania, what we call Pennsylvania, as a great opportunity to sell land and replenish the coffers. This is a map of Philadelphia on its side. So here we have the Delaware River. Okay, Center City is up here. So this is north, that's south. South on your left, north on your right. So the map of Philadelphia has been put on its side, and we see all these tracts of land given out at a fairly accessible price, but there are so many of them that William is making a great deal of money at this. And the tracts that you want, just as in Virginia, are the tracts bordering the river itself, because this is an ocean-going river. You can you can dock an ocean-going freighter up at your personal wharf. So the first purchasers, as they were called, were almost all Quakers, and they put themselves at what would become a hub of world trade. So this is a highly spiritual enterprise, and it's a highly material enterprise, kind of laying the foundation of America, right? God wants us to do good. God will also see that we do well. This will create a great tension, however, because Pennsylvania is one of the best books written about in colonial history is the best poor man's country. This is great soil. When you plow a field in New England, you're going to get the ingredients of those wonderful stone walls that Robert Frost liked, right? There aren't too, until you get to the mountains. This is a nice alluvial soil. So without having put out a whole lot of money, you can get a plot that will keep your family in health. This is the best poor man's country. And the reputation, it also is a religiously tolerant country. Pennsylvania and Rhode Island are the only two colonies that genuinely respect religious liberty as we know it. People came to America for religious liberty. Well, the Puritans did it to escape religious oppression, but they didn't want people to worship any which way. They wanted them to worship God's way. So there's not religious liberty as we know it in New England or in the Chesapeake. It's only in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island. So religious tolerance and good soil with plenty of it. But the problem is, as you sell more and more of this land, you're encroaching more and more on native people's property. And as we'll see, the ultimate crisis in Pennsylvania comes with the French and Indian War, which explodes out of this question of control of the backcountry of Pennsylvania. So going back to that patchwork quilt, you can see it in all these plots here, right? Every man and woman with their own family farm. And the Quakers were particularly vigilant about family values. They didn't want outsiders having influence on their kids, because how do you keep a community of pretty radical discipline together if you don't have creeds, clergy, sacraments, other things? How do you nurture that inner light? Because Quakers are not naive. They knew that sin and evil, violence and oppression were all around. You answer those questions by nurturing the inner light in a quiet, protective environment. Family nurture is of the essence here. We don't have public schools. We don't have established churches. Each family has to nurture the inner flame of their children and keep the evil flames outside. So family farms and family values in the best poor man's country. At the same time, however, as the illustration shows, Philadelphia is brilliantly placed, not for the climate. Our daughter lived in Philadelphia for 10 years, and oh, come on over when you have a summer break, Dad, when you're not teaching. Come over to Philadelphia in the summer. No, thank you. But it is a wonderful place for ocean-going commerce. You have the Delaware navigable beyond Philadelphia. You have all this agrarian agricultural wealth pouring into the city. If you want to ship your grain out, into your farmer, you got to get it to Philadelphia. Then there will be a middleman, a merchant, and bankers and ship owners to take care of it. So Philadelphia is just perfectly placed to be a wonderful center of international commerce, which creates a very affluent merchant class, symbolized here by the breakfast cereal logo that you knew and loved as a kid, right? Quaker oats. So Quakers are plain people committed to pacifism, committed to equality, growing a greater and greater affluent merchant class. Here will be the rub. And we'll get back to that in a minute. As I said, Pennsylvania is by charter a place of religious tolerance. And so this is a slide about Catholics in colonial America. You see the upper right-hand picture. This is the founding of the colony of Maryland, which was a tract of land owned by a Roman Catholic family in England, the Calvert family, and he established it as a haven for refuge of his persecuted Catholic countrymen. So Catholicism is not the established religion of Maryland, but it is, because of this particular family dynamic, a haven of refuge for Catholics, just as Massachusetts is a haven of refuge for the other outsiders, the Puritans, and Pennsylvania for yet a third group of outsiders, the Quakers. Very soon, relatively soon, other people are coming into Maryland so that Roman Catholics no longer have predominance, but they are also always tolerated. And in the early nation, the center of Catholicism is in the band from Maryland to Kentucky. One of my sisters has lived for a long time in Louisville, and you get the sense that the ruling class in Louisville is Roman Catholic because you have these really posh prep schools. You want your kid to get into St. Thomas or St. John's or so forth. And the very famous Gethsemane Monastery, any of you have ever been there? Gethsemane Abbey? Yeah, in Kentucky. That's where Thomas Merton hung out. It's one of the key, one of the original monastic houses in America. So Catholics in America, tolerated by charter in Pennsylvania, tolerated in Pennsylvania by charter and by Maryland by preference. One other, so not just Middle Colonies, and one other group, outgroup that's not limited by any means to the Middle Colonies is Judaism. This is a picture of the oldest synagogue in the United States, the oldest standing synagogue in Truro, Newport, Rhode Island. You can see in boldface here the 5 Jewish synagogues that were established before the American Revolution: Newport, New York City, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Savannah. These are all seaports. The Jewish folks that came over to colonial America most often came from Portugal. And they're Sephardim, they're not Ashkenazim, they're Sephardic Jews, Mediterranean, not Central European. And they were part of an international commercial network. I mean, what will induce you to invest all the money you have in a cargo that's going 4,000 miles away to a place you don't know? It helps if you have similar people over there. It helps if your rabbi can talk to his rabbi in case something goes wrong. Networks of trust. Over the Middle Ages, Jews had been forced out of everything else in Europe. They were not allowed to go to university, to own land, to be part of the military. They were forced into craft positions and commercial occupations. And yeah, they learned, and those established networks really helped them get going in colonial America. So these are the, except for Baltimore is not represented here. Baltimore does not get a synagogue until 1845, but all the key ports of Europe, of early America, except for Boston and Baltimore, have a Jewish synagogue by the time of the American Revolution. Okay, time for the Germans. German immigration, in mass scale, not this kind of refilter stuff through the Netherlands that becomes associated with Holland. German immigration in its own right really begins with in the 1680s with wars in the Rhine River Valley. France is continually trying to invade the Netherlands and the German territories to seize control of this prime highway, the great interstate of Western European commerce, the Rhine Valley. There are a lot of people in Germany who are in harm's way here. They are particularly, these are particular strongholds of the peace people, of Amish and particularly Mennonites. And so they're put in a very hard situation. So the earliest waves of German immigration are overrepresented with the Amish and the Mennonites, the plain people. They typically take ship in Amsterdam or Rotterdam. So refugees first, and then later on, as the 18th century proceeds, you get more and more German farmers who are getting pushed off their land or having a hard go of it. And they go to colonial America, typically to Philadelphia, excuse me, as redemptioners. These are kind of indentured servants. They sell their labor for X number of years to a person in America who will pay their passage on the ship. And then they will redeem that debt by working for that man or for that merchant or someone else to whom he sells your contract. So it's bond labor, as in earlier Virginia, but under much better circumstances. So refugees and redemptioners, people fleeing violence, people seeking a religious refuge, and people just like standard American immigrants later, just trying to leave a poor place to get to a better chance. And you see on the left-hand map, the area of settlement. They land in Philadelphia, they go out until they hit a mountain range, and then they spread out. So not the first zone of settlement, but the second zone of settlement, kind of on the east side of the Appalachians, from New York, Hudson Valley, down into the Shenandoah, and then further along into the Carolinas. So this leaves a very rich and diverse legacy. We have the so-called peace churches, the Mennonites and the Amish, the so-called Pennsylvania Dutch, which really means Pennsylvania Deutsch. The Americans never quite got that right. And it was unfortunate for some Dutch people in Iowa in the World War I that they still hadn't gotten the lesson. But we'll return to that later. The Pennsylvania Dutch, so plain people, you know, the Hausfrau at her spinning wheel, her husband after his farm work is over, piously studying the scriptures. And this is the oldest Mennonite worship site in America. It's in Germantown, Pennsylvania. Next time you get to Philadelphia, go up there. It's quite, I don't know, it's a pretty plain stone building, but it's yeah, the birthplace of the launch pad of what becomes a important part of American religious history. German Lutherans had been coming in under Dutch auspices, as you said, for some time, but when the immigration reaches a certain mass scale, we have zealous, devoted missionaries of the Lutheran Church that try to come over to America and try to organize networks, a denomination, to hold these people together. And this is one of them, the Reverend Henry Muhlenberg. There are very important Muhlenbergs down through American history, descendants of this man. And the original, or the kind of the cathedral of American German Lutherans, Zion Lutheran Church in Philadelphia, founded 1769. These guys really functioned as Methodist circuit riders, right? Before Methodist circuit riders were around. Reverend Muhlenberg had to, you see all the green triangles here, from Albany down into the Shenandoah Valley. He had to go from one of these churches to another, one of these settlements to another, to try to organize a church. Provided hymnals, give them rudiments of theological instruction, appoint lay leaders to lead the church because there were so few ministers. Then he would try to recruit promising young men to give their lives to this ministry. He grew a denomination out of scattered fragments. It was quite a remarkable achievement. And so did Reverend Michael Schlatter on the German Reform side. Reformed churches had been major components of the German scene ever since the elector of the Palatine, the Palatinate, capital Heidelberg. One of the key documents in Reformed history is the Heidelberg Catechism. Yeah. So the Rhine Valley had not only Amish and Mennonites, not only had powerful Roman Catholics in Cologne and Trier, but also had major Reform presence in Heidelberg. And so as this Rhine River migration comes over to America, we have the same thing as with the Lutherans, scattered people all over the colonial frontier that people like Michael Schlatter and his helpers had to try to, and successfully did, weave into a denomination. And we have upper right here, a pencil sketch of the first Reformed church in Philadelphia. And again, on a visit to Philadelphia, you can see the successor church of this. Philadelphia has great pioneer churches, the Pioneer Lutheran Church, the Pioneer German Reformed Church, Pioneer African American Church, Mother Bethel. And it's really, and you have Christ Church, the great Anglican Church, Episcopal Church, and you have one of the original Anglo-Catholic Episcopal churches, St. Mark's in Rittenhouse Square. I love it. That's where our daughter sang in the choir, and I'm a smells and bells guy at heart. So it's ironic here that the churches on the outs in Germany, the Amish and the Mennonites, kind of found it easiest to get going in America because they clustered together. They've been persecuted. They had strong, if you'll pardon the expression, well, it may be controversial, they had a tribal sensibility built into them. And so they clustered together. The people from the established churches of Germany, the Reformed and Lutheran, were just kind of scattershot, and these itinerant pastors had to kind of teach them loyalty or rekindle loyalty. But it worked because, as with immigrant churches down through time, into the 20th century, into the 21st century, religion was a place where immigrants could find meaning and community. And so over time, immigrants tend to be more religious or more participatory in America than they had been in the home country. But it takes a lot of work to get that done. So hats off to the Muhlenbergs and Schlatters of the world. Returning to the Quakers and the culminating crisis in the Middle Colonies. The culminating crisis in New England, remember, was the Salem witch trials. This is where contrary values or tensions in the community came to a head and under very difficult circumstances were compressed and exploded. Something similar happened in the Middle Colonies during the so-called French and Indian War, which is the North American phase of a world war, the 7 Years' War. The map up above shows the critical space, but we can get into detail if you're more interested in that. But the point is that the scene of war was a newly settled frontier, particularly by Scots-Irish people and German Lutherans and Reformed. These were newly settled people recently arrived from the old world, and now two great empires were conducting a war in their backyard, the British and the French. The Pennsylvania frontier became a scene of violence and ongoing conflict, and ordinary settlers, white settlers, were in harm's way. They naturally turned to Philadelphia, their capital, and asked the government for help. But the government is committed to pacifism, right? It's a Quaker government. Here's the proof of the pudding. This is a major crisis in the Society of Friends. And so this creates a split among the Friends between the establishment, the people who the Quakers who continue to want to hold power, participate in the government, and the radical reformers. And in the profile picture in the upper level is of John Woolman, who is the most famous Quaker reformer. He says that this frenzy on the frontier and the compromises that Quakers are willing to make with their faith in order to hold on to power, this is God's punishment upon our faithlessness. We have to reform our ways. We have to return to the original doctrine. That means get out of government, and that means giving up slavery. So Woolman, in this crisis of wartime in Pennsylvania, recalls Quakers to their original pacifism, but also becomes one of the first voices for what would be an increasingly large wave over time, one of the first voices of abolitionism. And he is an itinerant pastor too, up and down the Shenandoah Valley, up and down the seacoast, visiting every Quaker meeting and calling them to bar slavery and ban slaveholders from their numbers. And eventually that will succeed. The Society of Friends is the first Protestant denomination, well, the first Christian body in America to forswear slavery. That's in the future. Right now, Pennsylvania is still in a mess. And we have political parties formed. On the one hand, an alliance between Quakers and the people of the peace churches to try to keep people out of harm's way, maybe pretend that the war isn't there. On the other hand, we have the Reformed, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, the Anglicans, who want to supply protection to the frontier. How to resolve this? Bring in a crafty outsider, Benjamin Franklin. Born in Boston, migrates to Philadelphia, becomes one of the Western Hemisphere's or early America's most wealthiest people, retires from his business career in his mid-40s and devotes himself to public service, dreams someday of becoming His Majesty's Prime Minister for North America. The British Empire can get along just fine, he said. We'll have one parliament for the islands and one parliament for the continent. We'll have a prime minister for the British Isles. We'll have a prime minister for North America. And Your Majesty, I am ready to volunteer. he became Pennsylvania's ambassador to the court of St. James, to the government, for many years. He was out of America the second half of his career. He was abroad far more than he was in Pennsylvania. But in this, he's kind of like William Penn, who came to Philadelphia just once, lasted 18 months, ran away and never came back. He just couldn't get along with the people who were settling in his domain. Back to Ben. He says, guys, we cannot allow our inhabitants, our citizens, to be in harm's way like this. We have to raise arms and raise an army to defend them. And my friends, in the Society of Friends, I have a way for you to do that, respecting your conscience. You're not going to be paying any taxes that go to fund armies. You're going to be making a voluntary donation to the king's cause. And it'll be up to the king to spend it as he wants. Well, the king spent it on an army, but our hands are clean because we simply showed our devotion to the king. So there are ways to get around principles. Did I mention this before? Not just Dutch people, other people too. There are ways to get around difficulties when necessity calls. Ben Franklin pulled this deal off. The war was settled on the frontier by under the generalship of John Forbes. If you see the blue line going across east to west, essentially the Pennsylvania Turnpike, General Forbes created that out of a woods. It's called Penn's Woods for a reason. He hacked a highway out of a forest and brought a large number of forces to present-day Pittsburgh, then Fort Duquesne, conquered it, and that was the end of the war in Pennsylvania. It then migrated north to the battles of Montreal and Quebec. But this created a lasting split in the Society of Friends, and also shows a great example of how religion and politics can combine. President Theodore Roosevelt once said there are two things you don't want to witness: the making of sausage and the making of a bill going through Congress. And when you add religious loyalties and intensities to it, the process gets messier. But that's life, and it was certainly life in early America, certainly life in Pennsylvania at this critical passage. Okay, 5 minutes left for questions. I'm getting better. Covered a lot of things, a lot of different people. If you need more clarification, please ask.
Well, I have one comment,
Okay.
a question woven together, because you had put up there about the Quakers being peace churches, or
Yeah.
the Mennonites were included in that,
Yeah.
I think. Well, my dad grew up in Nebraska, and he was born in 1928. And his family was Catholic, Roman Catholic. And the stories I've heard from him and his siblings were all that they were persecuted by the Mennonites and the Klan at the same time. So that was something new to me. But
That's news to me.
so,
They were
but-
persecuted. Persecuted by the Klan, absolutely.
Yeah, but
By the Mennonites?
Yeah, by the Mennonites. So he kind of left the church because of that. Well, he did leave the church because of that, but
I've not heard of Mennonite persecution. I have heard of stories of Mennonite clannishness, that it's hard to when the Mennonites are predominant on the ground. It's maybe hard to get a loan, maybe hard to acquire land, maybe you're but it's an informal network of in dealing. Whereas Ku Klux Klan is people coming after you with fire and sword.
right.
So maybe
Well, my dad and his 5 sisters said the same thing.
Huh.
So I assumed they were telling the truth.
I wish
So- But he's gone now, so we can't
ask your
him.
sisters
Uh,
or
they-
his
they-
sisters. Oh, they're all,
Everybody passed away.
yeah, I would like to
So-
ask questions about that and see what they meant by persecution. Yeah.
We speak of Mennonites and Amish kind of together.
Yeah.
What is was there a split or was there a?
Okay, yeah, good,
what-
yeah,
what's
a
the-
good
what's the-
question. These peace churches, at least in Germany, take their name from kind of their founder. And so the founder of a people called Mennonites was Menno Simons. Priest, right at the time of the Reformation, the village right next to my father-in-law's. So if you bike around Friesland there, you're my father-in-law, late father-in-law's village, and then right next to it is Menno Simons was a priest here. They migrated, so I gathered a lot of support in the Netherlands and in Western Germany. Migrated, some of them migrated east as well as west to Russia. Welcomed in by Catherine the Great to kind of settle the river valleys there. So yeah, they're followers of Menno Simons. The Amish are followers, more set in Switzerland, of Jacob Amann, who was kind of their breakaway leader there. He had an argument with Ulrich Zwingli, the founder of one branch of the Reformed tradition in Zurich. Jacob Amann led his followers out of that church, and so they are the Amish. And then the Hutterites follow Jacob Hutter. I don't think you have to be Jacob to be, but yeah, Jacob Hutter had his own group.
I grew up in Central California in the San Joaquin Valley, and there was right down the street, there was a group of Mennonites called the German Baptist Brethren, and the term of derision was used Dunkards.
Yep. They're
I don't know where
they're just another, yeah, it's well, these people are, I should have mentioned that, geez. They're committed to adult baptism or believer baptism. You cannot, there's no legitimacy to baptizing an infant. A person has to be of accountable age, take ownership of this faith in him or herself. And, Jesus went down in the Jordan River and was immersed. Good enough for him, it's binding on us. And so full immersion baptism, as with Baptist churches, full immersion. So yeah, dunk. Again, a term of derision that kind of becomes an honorific.
These groups that try to hold back modernity have to draw lines of what's okay and what's not okay. In the movie Witness, which is a beautiful
brilliant.
picture of the Quaker and Amish groups, there's a reference to the Mennonites not being in because they allow refrigerators.
Yep.
And
so there are more accommodating Methodists, and then there are the old order Mennonites, I mean. Yeah, there are splits here. What accommodation of modernity? I have a great story for this. We have a place up near Montague, and we wanted, we didn't build a garage on it. We wanted so we wanted to build a shed. If you go to the border between Muskegon County and Nuevo County, you'll find a Mennonite community. I mean, horses and buggies and the whole 9 yards. Well, these guys build wonderful sheds. So my wife and I went out there and said, how's this going to work? And there's a huge complex. And we drive up, and the owner's house is next door. There is his teenage daughter with the bonnet, the long sleeves, the long skirt, running a power mower. What's up with that? And then we go to the shop, and there are these machine tools to cut. And so I asked the guy, pardon me, I teach American religion. If this embarrasses you, don't answer, that's fine. But can you explain what are the rules for using machinery and not using machinery? He said, yeah, very simple. Anything that takes you out of the community is verboten. But if you can operate it within the community, it's fine. So my daughter-in-law can and will mow the lawn with a power mower, but she may not have a motorbike. the machine in there, the machinery is run by DC, direct current, which is very local, right? The direct current cannot be transmitted over a power line. So it's generated right on site. AC is verboten. How'd you like to be on this church council? The funding, the capital for building his shop came from the church council because they don't use banks. They are off the grid. And they do pretty well because they don't use banks and they don't use the grid. So the church council has decided which of their guys gets a loan for his business and which doesn't. And I've been on a church council more than once, and I don't want, I am really glad we didn't have to deal with that. But it's, yeah, which technology keeps the community together and which technology will allow it to disperse or dissipate. And different, it's up to each, these are congregationalists, right? Each church is its ultimate authority, and they can decide where to draw the line. How did they get the shed vows? Thereby has a wonderful tale. Do you know the term a Shabbos goy? In Eastern European Jewry, Shabbos, Sabbath, you would have, and this, my late mother-in-law talks about this too in Friesland. A Jewish family would have a Gentile neighbor that could come over and do tasks that are forbidden on the Sabbath, like light the stove and this and that. Well, these guys had hired a neighbor with his own big trailer to come over, load the thing on it, drive it to our plot. They're not driving it, but this neighbor is doing them a Christian service until the guy who's trying to unload it on our lot, I mean, this is near Lake Michigan, right? That sand is beach sand, and his trailer got stuck. And he starts just a string of profanity. So I call our vendor and say, your helper here is having a problem. Don't worry about it. I'm coming over. And he comes and he has a little sight tractor. Again, a sight, you can't take it very far. And he maneuvers that shed. I mean, patient, and he had two kids, his two boys with him, dressed in the long pants and the hat. And he was so patient. I said, dude, you're not going to be able to do this. Oh, no, and he got that placed, and it was really impressive. But yeah, it's you got to make some accommodation to modernity. Right, because you're not on the grid. So there are a lot of people in America today that are trying to get off the grid, right? The system out there is worldly, corrosive, imprisoning, hostile, lethal. You got to make your separate peace. And the Anabaptists or the Mennonites and Amish have been doing that for a while. Okay. Oh, we're over time. Thank you.